guys, welcome back to the Pursuit of Property podcast. Today, Cade and I are reviewing another one of our favorite books. It's called Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson, MD. It's a super short book, but Cade and I have gotten a lot of value from it over the last few years, and we continually reread it to remind ourselves of some of the lessons. Cade, how are you, man?
I'm doing good, man. I think this is The Go-Giver was our first book that we read as a team back on the Clayson group. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think this was our second book before we all kind of went out and did our own thing. So this was the second book we read as a team, and both of those books are awesome. But Who Moved My Cheese, I think, is going to be a great book to talk about today. A little different kind of book compared to some of the other ones you guys might have read out there, or some of the other ones we've read, even personally. But I kind of like the style. It's more of like a story style book.
Is. It's super easy read, too.
Yes.
Although I read a lot of books, I listen to them on audio. I struggle sometimes with staying focused during a book. This book is super easy. One, the audiobook's only about 30 minutes long. And two, the story is somewhat simple and interesting to a point that, like, you know, it's pretty easy to listen to.
Yeah. They dumb it down to at elementary level to everybody can understand what's going on.
But it has a lot of complexity, too, like, if you think about it.
Yeah.
So, just briefly, the idea of Who Moved My Cheese, it's a book about change. And so, it's told in the story of, like, a tiny world where it's like a little maze, and there's only 4 characters that we hear about, but there's other people in it. And it starts by describing 2 mice named Sniff and Scurry and 2 humans, little tiny humans, named Him and Haw. So, obviously, Sniff and Scurry kind of have names that describe their own skills, right? So, Sniff is really good at smelling out, you know, the cheese in the corridors, and Scurry is a fast mouse that runs ahead to find it, right?
Yeah. And Him and Haw, they're little humans, right? They're all in this one maze, and they're at least in the beginning of the book and until, you know, the changing point, they're pretty similar. They kind of use their logic, reasoning to kind of go out and in search of the cheese. Right. So we've got our 2 mice characters, we've got our 2 little human characters, and both groups throughout the book spend their time looking for cheese in the maze.
And cheese is kind of it's different for each group, right?
Absolutely.
So for, like, the mice, cheese is literally just food. And they just use trial and error to find food. So they run down a corridor, they come back, they try it again.
Yep. You got Sniff sniffing it out, Scurry's running. They're both running back and forth in search of their food.
Right.
For Him and Haw, though, the cheese is kind of symbolism for success, for happiness, right?
Right. Security.
Yeah,
There's
security.
a lot to it.
And the cool thing about this book, you know, the cheese to the reader or the cheese to the listener is kind of up to your own interpretation, right? Which makes it, I think, even cooler of a read for people because everybody's going to interpret it their own way.
Right. And so the idea is that each day both groups just wake up and they go to search for the cheese. Kind of talks about like the rat race, right?
Yeah.
So like we wake up every day and we go to work. For them, their work is actually finding the cheese and, you know, racing along this maze to get, you know, to find it. And it talks about how the maze has corridors that are scary and there's dead ends and there's tons of different like distractions, right?
Yeah.
But eventually in the story, both groups are running along and they find Cheese Station C, which has this abundance of cheese and it's like a cheese mountain, right? And the mice get there first because they're faster.
Yeah.
And start digging in. The humans make it there too, and everybody's happy, right?
Yep. Sniff and Scurry, they're eating away, doing their thing.
Well, it talks real quick because it talked about something specific. They actually like inspect all the cheese and then they start digging in.
That's right. So they Sniff and Scurry, they're on the look for if the cheese starts to get moldy. They're on the look for anything that may be wrong with the cheese. And then they start digging in, right? But they are very conscious of the cheese, how it is, how much of it is left. They're very conscious of the cheese.
Yeah.
Right? Him and Ha, on the other hand, they come across this big mountain of cheese and they're like, holy crap. This is we made it. We made it. This is awesome. So him and Ha, they go out, they kind of transform their whole lifestyle. They move closer to Cheese Station C in their little maze.
Yeah.
Each and every day they wake up, they're going to Cheese Station.
They wake up a little later each day too.
Yep. And they're going to grub on the cheese and hang out at Cheese Station C, and they kick back their feet and think, shoot, we've made it. We've got this mountain of cheese and everything's good.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because they talk about having the cheese makes you feel happy, right? And so they're like, oh, we feel great. And human nature, especially when you start finding some level of like comfort or success, is to kind of just feel like it's permanent. And Sniff and Scurry every morning would wake up, and they would wake up early, just like they would when they didn't have the cheese. They would sprint to the Cheese Station C. They would do their inspection and check to see if it's depleting, or just like you said, if it's getting old or moldy or whatever. So that way they could kind of see, okay, where are we at? And then they would sit down and eat. And later in the day, the humans would kind of just wake up, and Hem and Haw would waddle over there and sit down and lounge in their cheese. And from there, the story gets a little interesting.
Yeah. So Sniff and Scurry, they start to realize that the cheese is almost gone. Like, they've been here for a while. They've been eating their cheese, staying conscious and aware of their situation. And they come to a realization, like, this cheese is going to run out. We're going to have to figure something out.
And then one day it does.
And then one day it does. Scurry throws on his little rat running shoes, and Sniff goes out sniffing out for some more cheese, and they go out into the maze in search of another cheese station, another cheese stash.
Right. That day they get there, and early in the morning, the cheese is gone. They immediately know that there's a simple solution to a simple problem. They just put back on their running shoes. They went back into the maze, and they just kept doing what they had always done.
Yep.
But
yeah,
Hem and Haw, because they wake up late, get to Cheese Station C later in the day, find out there's no cheese, and their reaction is much different than the rodent instinct of Sniff and Scurry.
Yeah.
Theirs, Hem just starts screaming, "Who moved my cheese?"
Yeah.
Over and
Someone
over
had
and
stolen
over.
it. It's gone. Somebody had taken it.
Right.
Throwing themselves into a huge fit.
Right. And so they end up going the whole day with no cheese, and they're just in like this state of denial.
Yeah.
Right. And so they're sitting there trying to figure out, did they move the cheese to this corner or this corner? But ultimately they don't find any cheese, and they ended up kind of moping back to their house and deciding, okay, well, tomorrow we'll go back to Cheese Station C.
Yeah. And days go by. They're getting, more hungry. They're kind of same thing. They're lethargic. They're kind of down, and they're like really unsure what to do. And they kind of talk themselves into, at least Hem is like, oh, they'll bring the cheese back. The cheese will come back. Don't worry. The cheese will come back. Days and days go by. Same thing. No
Haw
cheese.
was a little bit less decided that the cheese was just going to be reappeared.
Yes.
But they come up with this idea that, well, we'll work hard, and that will achieve our cheese. So instead of going into the maze, they ended up like burrowing a hole into the wall to see if they moved the cheese into the wall.
Yeah.
And after laboring all day, they find no cheese
in the wall. Yeah.
And it was, that's kind of a metaphor for activity versus productivity. And you and I talk about that a lot on our podcast. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, that activity was the wrong activity, and it bore them no cheese.
And him being the one who is more in denial, kind of throwing more of the fit between the two, he's the one who's really too scared to leave where they are, right? So his kind of thought and his mindset is, well, the maze is scary. What if we never find cheese again? the cheese will come back. Just wait. It's too scary in the maze. There's not even going to be any cheese in the maze.
Yeah.
So him out of the two is really the one who's most reluctant, most naive in the sense that he's expecting the cheese to come back. Ha, on the other hand, kind of finds himself sitting there one day and he's kind of laughing at himself, right? And he goes, he thinks to himself, what would you do if you weren't afraid?
It's interesting because in this story, they talk about he scratches it on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And when he decides, he laughed at himself, right? So he too was scared at the start, but eventually he's laughing at himself saying like, dude, we're just waiting for the cheese to reappear. It's never going to reappear. And Ha is saying it's going to Hem is saying it's going to reappear. And Ha says, well, I'm going to go out into the maze. And all of a sudden he builds up all this courage and it's immediately taken away by Hem reminding him, well, what if you go out in the maze and there's no cheese? And scares him, right? And we all can relate to that. And so in response to being told, it's too scary to go out there, he scratches on the wall, what would I do if I weren't afraid? And so he puts on his running shoes and goes out into the maze by himself.
And the rest of the story along the way is kind of Ha's journey of going back into the maze, right? So Sniff and Scurry, they end up finding another kind of stash of cheese. I believe it was at Cheese Station N. Or M. And, so they find their next stash. And eventually Ha, after, along the way, until he eventually finds that same cheese station with Sniff and Scurry, he's kind of etching these lessons learned along the wall while he's lonely and afraid going through this maze in search of new cheese. And these are kind of the main points and the main takeaways of the book. So we talked about he wrote that first thing on the wall.
He writes these on the wall too because he really wants Hem to come with him.
That's right.
And he's trying to leave like a path of motivation and direction on how to get to where Cheese Station is. Knowing that he doesn't know where he's going yet.
Yeah.
It's an interesting concept.
So let's talk about some of the stuff he etches in the wall along the way.
Can we start with having the cheese makes you happy?
Yeah.
Because that's the first one that the author goes out of his way to like reference.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of skipped over a little bit in the story. What did you take from that?
So having the cheese makes you happy. The cheese for me in that etching in the wall is a culmination of, one, success in my professional life, right? But also personally with my relationships with friends, with family, with my significant other, and being happy with all those pieces and everything kind of being in harmony, right? With my cheese and feeling good and feeling happy about myself.
Yeah.
That's what I take from that first, etching in the wall from Ha.
And so it's interesting to me. What I got from it was that the first time that they go out into the maze, they're not scared. It's to them, it's like, well, this is what you do to find cheese.
Mm-hmm.
Once they found the cheese, that saying to me kind of signified, okay, like some kind of complacency in a way. Like, oh, having the cheese makes me happy.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I know that a lot of people find happiness with having success and all that. Not to say that that's not good, but sometimes when we feel that success, it leads to like, oh, now we feel like we're, immovable. It's like we're always going to have this.
Well, and that's an interesting point. Let's talk about that real quick because we were having a conversation. I don't remember. I think it was with Corbin when we had him back on the podcast. It was before we started. The three of us were sitting down and we were talking about, or at least you were telling him about your year last year, right? Your total volume and sales, had a great year with selling real estate and investments. And you were like, I mean, dude, I had a great year. My lifestyle was awesome last year. I could kind of pull the reins back a little bit, not put too much effort into building more business from that. And, it could be good like that. But we're not wired that way.
Reminding ourselves of books like this is what keeps you kind of moving, though.
Yeah.
Because we were talking and we were saying, like, okay, we've each found like a little bit of success, and there's something to be said that when you find that first, hit of cheese, now all of a sudden you kind of think to yourself, well, I could stay here. This is pretty nice. Why go back out and work so hard? You know, I don't need more cheese.
Yeah.
It's an interesting concept, but when I saw that, I thought, okay, there's probably a lot of people that we know personally who are in this stage. Having the cheese feels good.
Yeah.
Later in the story, it talks about finding the cheese. But in this situation, the author really pulls forward the thought that only the humans had, which was having cheese makes you feel good.
Yeah. And that leads us into the next one, which says he etches this along the wall because when Haw first starts in the maze, remember, he's lonely and afraid. He's by himself. He has no idea what he's getting himself into when he starts in the maze. And he etches along the way, when you stop being afraid, you feel good.
You skipped one.
Where are we at?
What would
that's
you do
right.
if you weren't
What
afraid?
would you do if you weren't
Because
afraid?
that's what even allows him to get to
to that one. That's right. What would you do if you weren't afraid?
It's a huge turning point in the story.
Because not only is he asking that to himself, but like you said, he's etching that for
him.
In hopes when him feels the courage to make that jump, to give him that boost and to be like, shoot, let's go in this maze and let's go get this done. Let's go get some more cheese.
Well, so you and I both come from families that have more traditional education, traditional jobs. I know that when I got in the business, I had people kind of saying, well, aren't you scared to go on commission only? Aren't you scared to start a business? What if you don't make it? I, to this day, still hear people say that to me. What happens if the market turns? It's the same statement that Hem makes to Haw, which is, well, it's scary out there. What if you don't find the cheese? And it was interesting to see his response. I would have never thought of this question, but it's, what would you do if you weren't afraid?
Yeah. And to me, that reminds me of when something similar, when people say, when people pose the same question, like, what, aren't you afraid to do this? Or aren't you afraid your business would fail or do X, Y, Z? And you get the people who say, well, at least I know I did everything in my power to go out there and do my very best and fail that way, instead of never knowing and never making the jump in the beginning anyway. Right.
Yeah.
So I went out there and I did my very best, and it wasn't because I didn't do my very best and put in my entire effort.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's the fear of striving, right? So like, especially, if you're an investor and you're listening to this podcast, when you go to buy your first property, there's going to be fear. When you go to do your first flip, there's going to be fear. When you have your first, loss, when you make your first, bad investment, there's going to be fear. And continuing to remind yourself that, like, you have to make the decision as if you weren't afraid, and that you can solve these problems, and it's interesting because once he reads that, he actually takes the action and just goes into the maze. Because he knows that there's more cheese out in the maze, or there's a better chance of finding cheese out in the maze than staying in Cheese Station C waiting for the cheese to come back.
To magically reappear. Which leads us to the one I jumped the gun on, which was when you stop being afraid, you feel good. At least speaking from personal experience, at least in my business, it can, and for those of you out there, I know we've talked to a ton of people, whether you're out there full-time job looking, to get started in real estate, or you're out there, you're young, and, you're looking to go this route instead of maybe a traditional route or work a 9 to 5.
Right.
And we've been there. We know it's scary, right?
It is really scary.
It's nerve-wracking. It's stressful. But this one, when you stop being afraid, you feel good. In my experience, and it's a huge mindset shift, right? It doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
It's skills and mentors and coworkers and friends who kind of bring you up. But when you stop being afraid and you're like, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do this shit, I feel better in that mindset when I go out there and I'm going to do it. No matter what, I'm going to go out there and do it. I'm not going to stress. I'm not going to trip out. I'm not going to be scared. And we're going to go get it done.
Yeah, you and I always talk about trying to operate from the abundance mindset, right?
Oh,
and
absolutely.
The whole point of an abundance mindset is to remind yourself that there's ample opportunity and there's no reason to be scared about whether or not you're going to make it. And yeah, like you said, once he got into the maze and he overcame his fear of, well, what if I don't find the cheese? And he started thinking, well, I'm going to find the cheese. I don't know when. He starts finding that he's moving faster. When he got back into the maze, it talks about how slow he is because he hasn't been doing it.
Yeah.
And I think this is an interesting thought, but that there's people like us who have been in the business for a few years, and we can both admit that we're caught in some similar routines that we've been doing for years now. Well, imagine if we're the guys right now, we're both him sitting in Cheese Station C, and there's a way for us to get out of there and get back into the maze, but we don't want to do it because we're comfortable. We're too scared about, well, we have the cheese. What if we don't find the cheese, right? Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting. To me, for me personally, it took me getting a job in the restaurant business on top of my current job in order to remove some of the fear, because our business, when we talk about it in this perspective, is very much monetarily based. And when I knew that my mandatory bills were going to be paid, I was able to operate from not out of fear that I need to make this money to pay my bills. It was, I want to make this money so that I can leave my other job.
Absolutely.
And I experienced that literally within the month of getting that job, my business ticked up and took off. And then I was able to keep operating, not as much out of fear and more out of excitement that I'm going to find the cheese. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that when I fall back into that fear, oh, what if I don't, I can be honest and admit that I've even had it recently where I think, well, man, I have a lot of money going out and not a lot of money coming in this month. I noticed that my mindset just I see it start ticking back towards fear, and I have to actively bring it back and remind myself, what would I do if I wasn't afraid?
And it leads us into our next one, which relates back to our story when, Sniff and Scurry, they start to notice Cheese Station C kind of dwindling, getting a little moldy. And it's the sooner you let go of old cheese, the sooner you find new cheese. So how do you interpret that? Not only in the story, but at least, like you were just saying, how does that kind of lead to, at least for you? I'm curious.
Well, I want to say, too, in the story, what he found was only a few little scraps of leftover cheese from somebody else. Mm-hmm. And he was so excited about the few scraps of cheese that he had never seen before. And it was so delicious that he thought to himself, well, if I had just left Cheese Station C sooner, I could have eaten all of this cheese or had more of it. And so, to me, it kind of strikes me as the people who sit on the sideline out of fear. Once they do jump, often they jump too late, and they don't get as much as they could have had they operated from a sense of excitement. Obviously, you have to think about what you're doing, but to me, the later you jump into it, the less you get. I can see that in the investing world. I was doing so well as a realtor. I didn't devote nearly as much time to my investments. And now that I'm spending a lot of time on investments, I think to myself, yeah, I made pretty good money. I could have made 5 times that if I had jumped sooner.
That's exactly the example I was going to bring up, which was at the end of last year and beginning of this year for the two of us. You more so a little more than me, having at least experience with investment deals, done multiple investment deals, like you said, successful year being an agent, right? But kind of our old cheese, right? But we made the decision to kind of shift and invest in some marketing in our investment business.
And we brought somebody onto our team.
Yeah.
And we dedicated a lot of our time.
Yeah. A lot of that.
We
many
reworked
months
our
now.
entire CRM. We reworked everything.
Exactly. So it's little things like that to where now, even now, we're starting to see the investment into the investment business for us start to kind of see, future stuff that the fruits of our labor start to slowly but surely pop up. So that's the example I pull from that, kind of letting go of that old cheese. And then, because exactly like you said, the sooner you could have let go of that old cheese, the sooner you would have found the new cheese.
Yeah. And I think to me it also applies to other markets and other parts of my life. So I was thinking about it. I'm very invested into the real estate world, but I have no money in the stock market. And the only reason I don't have money in the stock market is because of my own fear of putting money in and losing. And I need to continue to remind myself that I tell people every day, you got to operate out of abundance because real estate does work. But here I am being a hypocrite as always and not investing myself into another market. And so it's interesting because it applies to a ton of different aspects of your life.
Yeah. And talking about this new cheese, right? Building off of that last, etch in the wall, is imagining your new cheese helps you find it.
This is a hard one, dude.
Yeah.
This is I think where everybody could improve. Everybody.
Absolutely. And everybody, we've been coached on it. We've heard it from everybody. We know that it works. It is just like you said, one of the hardest things, not only to kind of shift your mindset into doing, but to actually implement, be consistent with, and, have that positive self-talk and self-image.
Yeah.
And, visualizing you going and having that new cheese.
He was talking in the book, and Hawes saying that, now that he's had a taste of this cheese, he can taste, he can see himself at this new cheese station surrounded by all of these delicious cheeses, and how when he gets there, he's going to enjoy that cheese. And that by imagining and seeing very vividly that cheese, he feels pulled to go in certain directions that lead him closer to the cheese. And we've had other people talk to us about it. I've always been very skeptical about visualization and stuff like that. It feels very, very like kind of like smoke and mirrors almost.
Yeah.
It feels kind of like guru-y.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Another way of thinking about it is like every day I wake up and I write my goals and I write affirmations and I write gratitude. Well, I'm just visualizing. I'm allowing my brain to see this is what I tell myself every day, what I'm going to do. So I already do it. I just laugh because it's very hard to think. Just thinking about the cheese will get you closer.
Yeah. And this is a whole topic that we could have a guest and do a whole episode on. One of the best guys we know at this, talking about it and coaching people on it, is obviously one of our mentors, Jason Pritchard. And a funny example that he was telling us that I'll share real quick. So for those of you out there this was my initial thinking, right? And you were saying kind of smoke and mirrorish. Why am I going to sit here and, imagine myself doing what am I even supposed to think of?
Right.
How do I even do it? It's all BS, whatever. But one example I remember him giving us was, for the longest time, he's told us that he wants a G-Wagon.
Yes.
Right? So I remember him telling me that, and it was mid last year when I kind of needed that mindset shift to get back into gear. He was like, dude, I would literally sit there during my meditation and visualization, and I would imagine myself going down to the Mercedes dealership, down to what clothing I was wearing, the watch I was wearing, how I was feeling. He would imagine himself opening the G-Wagon door at the dealership, getting into the G-Wagon, what the leather felt like, what the interior would look like, how his hand felt on the steering wheel, how he felt in that moment, and driving that G-Wagon off the lot, right? Which, when you think about it, is like, what does that do?
It's
the concept, like you were saying, is just
it
very
feels
hard to grasp and a very hard tool to sharpen and hone in. But once you do, we know that it's a very powerful tool.
Look, I do a lot of things I do not understand how they work. I do not understand how cell phones work. I do not understand how my truck works. What I understand is that the people that I watch who practice visualization consistently over a long period of time do the things that I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
This book reaffirms that if you can visualize the cheese and see yourself in that cheese, tasting the cheese, smelling the cheese, feeling the cheese, you will get closer to the cheese. I can't explain it any better than that. Coming from a religious sense, obviously our podcast is fairly non-religious, but you and I are both Christian. I am Catholic. I believe that in the Bible it says, ask and you shall receive.
Yep.
And I see visualization aligns with asking. If you know exactly what you want and you ask for it in the sense that you sit there and you think, this is me in that moment doing the thing I want, you will be given the opportunities to achieve what you would like if it's within your path, right? And
absolutely,
most of us, I'm going to say everybody, has the opportunity to have some feeling of success or happiness as it is for them as part of their path, or else they wouldn't be attracted to it. So I don't know. That's a very hard one. The only way you can visualize too, and I just experienced it this morning when you left, I was doing my morning routine in here. You have to let go of the fear of whatever your fear is, right? So the fear of losing the cheese or whatever. And so I was writing down my goals and I was visualizing my goals. And the weirdest thing ever, I could actually feel my whole body like relax when I saw, okay, if I hit my goal, I don't have to worry about if I find the cheese. I will have more cheese than I could ever spend, right? It's just very interesting because it has a physical effect if you can change your mindset.
Yeah. And the next one that we see Ha etch in has to do a little bit with, the old cheese and being aware of your situation and stuff. Like Sniff and Scurry were originally at Cheese Station C. And that is smell the cheese often so you know when it's getting old. Which to me at first was a little bit of a harder one just to kind of understand at the beginning, right? So we know Sniff and Scurry over at Cheese Station C, they were constantly inspecting the cheese, checking it for mold, being very aware of their surroundings and the cheese. Now, for smelling the cheese often so you know when it's getting old, I take that as not it being aware enough to, if you are finding yourself being complacent and falling into a trap of not really being aware and of your situation and motivated enough to go find new cheese when your current cheese is starting to get a little old.
And only you know that.
Yes, nobody else can tell you when it's time.
Yeah. So how has that affected you?
For me, at least on a daily basis, right? And not just on a daily basis, but also in our monthly end of the month meetings where it's like we look back on our month as a whole. And I think it's a little bit easier to look in the macro sense, right? Because on the micro sense, going through the day, I can find myself, maybe in like a little rut. Like, what am I doing? I spent some of the day, feeling down, not really sure what's going on, don't know what's going on next. And it's like, how am I going to take that, old cheese mindset? How am I going to shift that and be like, look, that can't be getting stuck myself in a situation like that or a mindset like that, right? And knowing that, hey, it's time to leave that old mindset behind. It's time to leave those old feelings behind and go out there and get stuff done and have the new cheese.
Yeah.
For me, at least. Do you feel something similar or interpret it a little different way?
I read it and kind of saw it as like just keeping tabs on yourself at all times. So we have a lot of ways of checking how much money we have, how our business is operating, things like that. What I've always found this to be the most important for is like my personal life. You know, I've always found it very difficult to think, okay, like how do I check how I feel, you know, day on day, week on week, year on year, just personally. And so for me, smell the cheese often so you know when it's getting old. I've implemented it in the sense of like meditation. So like 15 minutes in the morning, I'll just be completely frank. I'm not consistent on it. It's not something I have succeeded at doing every day the way I have more so with my goal writing and everything. But being able to evaluate and be aware, you know, am I feeling like I'm slowing down? Do I feel like I am burning out? Do I feel like I could be doing more, right? So figuring out kind of how I feel there. It's, to me, that was a huge part of it. And Sniff and Scurry did it instinctually, right? They inspected the cheese and they could tell what was coming down the pike. And so when the time came that it ran out, they weren't surprised. They put on their shoes and ran. By not inspecting it, Hem and Haw allowed themselves to get caught off guard. And if you aren't expecting change, that's the only way you'll be surprised. The one consistent thing in life is change. So, you know, that's kind of how I've expected it, or how I've implemented it. This is probably a lot harder for me than any of the other things, just because keeping tabs of everything is kind of hard, you know, unless you journal it, write it down, things like that. And again, the whole point of this is that by keeping track, you can predict a little bit about what's going to happen.
Yeah. And the last one we've got on here that Haw etches into the wall in our story, which is an interesting one, and I'm excited for us to go over, is move to the new cheese and enjoy it. Now, we bring up Jason a lot in our examples because he has obviously been in our similar space and has gotten coaching in XYZ and obviously relayed that coaching and mentorship onto us. And we can't tell you what to do. We can only relay our advice. And a piece of advice that I remember receiving from Jason and Benny both, and that I saw Jason just post about on his Instagram the other week, was one of his biggest regrets along the way in real estate when he was stacking a bunch of rentals in the beginning and going out and grinding, was that he didn't enjoy any of the fruits of his labor in the beginning. So when he's out there going and getting this new cheese, these new rental properties, building his business, he was not enjoying the fruits of his labor at all, which to me is, you know, treating yourself to a vacation or whatever it is, enjoying the cheese in the process as you're going along, right?
Yeah,
and
that's a really big key.
And not just, you know, not being aware of your new cheese and not enjoying it while you have it, right? And you're just if in relation to this book, if we are Sniffer Scurry, we're Hem and Haw, if we find the cheese, right? But this huge stash of cheese, but you're always on, you just go straight into the maze and keep going out and looking for other stations of cheese, you're not enjoying the big stash of current cheese you just found.
Yeah, it was a hard one for me to interpret in the sense that, you know, it's a balancing game. But yeah, that was my conclusion, was that why spend your life in the maze looking for the cheese? If you find it, enjoy some of the cheese. Mm-hmm. And I don't disagree. Once you find the cheese, you can, you know, enjoy it and then kind of branch back out and look around. You know where the cheese is now. You can come back to the cheese, look for more, you know. And the book talks a lot about, too, that Haw just like finds that his enjoyment comes from actually finding the cheese, like looking for it. And for us, especially if you're an investor, 90% of your job is actually looking for the opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
At least in our stage. I bet that there's other, developers and stuff that are in different stages. But, if you're looking to wholesale and flip and buy and sell real estate and purchase your properties and your rentals, most of your time is spent actually just looking for it. And you need to be happy in that process. Otherwise, you're going to spend all of your life upset just to be happy for a couple of years.
Yeah.
We always make fun of people in a 9-to-5, like, oh, you hate your week so much, you rush through 5 days of your week to enjoy 2 of them. If we're doing the same thing, like we don't enjoy it and we can't get out of the fear and we can't get out of the missing our old cheese and all that, like we're the same position. If you don't enjoy the process and you don't enjoy some of the cheese when you find it, like you're never going to be happy.
Yeah. And some people will take that and they'll tell you, well, no, you got to go out and you got to grind and you got to put in the work and you can reward yourself at the end, right? And oftentimes the people who do that are also very successful, right?
Yeah.
Now, are they happy? Are they unhappy?
Ask them.
Ask them. I mean, I've got an assumption of what most of them are, but again, we can't tell you guys what to do. But I would agree in the sense that there's got to be some sort of balance, right? You're not going to get complacent with your new cheese and just stop going out and looking for new cheese. But me personally, I also don't want it to be the opposite. When I get new cheese, I don't want to be constantly always out devoting 100% time, resources, money into not enjoying any of the new cheese I may have just found or just earned, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be a balance, and the balance is going to be up to you.
And a lot of lessons that Hall learns throughout this is he's learning as he's eating cheese that he's found along the way.
Yeah.
And it's not enough cheese to sustain him like a cheese station, but crumbs. And
yeah.
so
crumbs from Sniff and Scurry.
Right. And so, when you're out there and you make a big sale or you do whatever, obviously that most of that money needs to go towards other things.
Mm-hmm.
But don't be afraid to give yourself a little bit of that. And your brain will change when you don't feel like you're limiting yourself.
Yeah.
And so, if that means give yourself a payroll, or like a pay raise, or give yourself a bonus, or like you said, go on a vacation, whatever your brain, whatever you like the most. Some people like time off. Some people like goods. Some people like donating it. Whatever your thing is. Yeah, it's important. Like if you want to be successful, expect the change, move with the change, and be happy about change. Like, we're in a world where things are always changing.
And maybe, a compromise for people out there who, don't really want to do the balance, and what I've heard people will do, which is, I think, a very good way to go about it, is, say there is something you want, right? In this example, let's just use a G-Wagon. Let's use a car in this example, right? Now, you're out constantly looking for new cheese. Let's use this example. In order for me to reward myself with that, I'm going to go out and buy 15 rentals. So I won't reward myself with that until I go out and I find this new cheese and I buy 15 more rentals, and then I can reward myself with that car, either because, your cash flow from your rentals are paying for it, or as of like a reward for yourself for putting in the work and going out and buying 15 rentals. Maybe having, a goal like that is new cheese or new goal driven, but also able to kind of reward yourself and give the fruits of your labor back a little bit. Maybe that's a good balance for people out there.
You don't want to roll around in the dirt while you're working so hard and never get any benefits, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, man, it seemed like this is a really, really good book to have on your bookshelf.
Yes.
I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I know that this book was really easy to understand, and it's a good refresher. If, like you said, it's only 100 pages.
Listen to it in 30 minutes.
30-minute audiobook, and it's a good reminder when you get kind of stuck in a lull. What would I do if I wasn't afraid? Search for the new cheese. It's a fun process.
Yeah, I think books, especially for those of you who have a hard time reading or even listening to a traditional book where you can get very distracted very easily. It's not very relatable, or it's hard for you to keep track. Having this little story with Sniff and Scurry and Him and Haw, at least for me when I was reading it, made it less bookish when I was reading it, right? Which is a good thing for people out there who have a hard time reading or listening, to self-development books or stuff that might be a little more, straightforward and direct than some nonfiction stuff, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to link the Amazon link for this book down in the podcast description. You guys are going to be able to find it there. We're also going to include it in our book list. We're going to include this episode in our book playlist over on YouTube. So this is going to be the cover, Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. Thank you guys for tuning in to this month's book review podcast.
Thank you.